And thank you for having us here again. My name is Raymond Kwong. I am an advocate with Disability Rights California. And with me today, we have Leonie Pfeiffer and Gracie. We both will be supporting our presenters today. So our presenters today is one of our senior attorney, Maria Ariate, and our staff attorney, Emily Ikuta. Before we officially get started, I want to give you a quick overview of who we are and what our agency does. Disability Rights California, or DRC. We are a statewide nonprofit, and we provide free legal services to people with disabilities with any disability-related issues. We have offices statewide, with our headquarters being in Sacramento. And attorneys and advocates can help with a variety of issues from access or discrimination with housing, with transportation, with education, which includes special education and higher education. We can help with some employment reasonable accommodation issues. We can also help with public health benefits, such as Medi-Cal, in-home supportive services, and Social Security overpayment issues that relates to work. And within our agency, we also have separate programs, such as our Office of Client Rights Advocacy, or OCRA. They specialize in helping clients of the regional center, and our Client Assistance Program, or CAP. They specialize in helping clients of the Department of Rehabilitation. And we also have our voting rights unit because elections coming up. If you or someone you know would like more information regarding accessible voting, you can also call us. We have a separate voting hotline, but you can also call our 800 number, our main phone number, 800-776-5746 for more information. And for any disability related topic, our phone lines are open Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. If you call us outside those hours, you can leave us a message and our advocates will get back to you as soon as possible. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to our presenters. Thank you.
Thank you, Raymond. Good evening, everyone. So I'm Maria, and a little later, Emily will also be presenting. And we're presenting on the basics of self-determination, the self-determination program. This is not an orientation that you need to take in order to get on the self-determination program. It's just a training that DRC is giving on self-determination. So next slide. So the traditional way of getting services through the regional center is that as a consumer of the regional center, you're going to have an IPP meeting with your service coordinators and others on the team to talk about goals, etc., and come up with services, right? And then the service coordinator will take all that information once you've signed the IPP and secure services. That's the traditional way of getting services. So self-determination is different because under the self-determination program, the consumer is going to put together, along with the regional center, obviously there's going to be a budget and there's going to be a spending plan, and it allows the consumers to make more decisions about the services and supports that they need, and the spending plan, and even choice of providers, and why. So the plan is important so that the consumer can be safe and healthy and comfortable getting the services that he or she needs. Now, as you know, the Department of Developmental Services administers the whole regional center system. You are a consumer of a regional center in your area, and you become eligible for regional center services by reaching out to your regional center and applying. Once you're approved to be a regional center consumer, you're assigned a service coordinator, and then you get together and have your IPP meeting, develop a plan. But now there's a choice. Do you want to go with a traditional method or do you want to try the self-determination program? Next slide. So back in 1998, they started a pilot project with the self-determination program. They chose 200 participants who gave feedback on the self-determination program. And so in July of 2021, the program became available to any regional center consumer. So anyone can decide to, to opt for the self-determination program. It's voluntary. You don't have to. Let's say that you decide you want to try self-determination and then down the line you decide, oh, I don't really like this. I want to go back to the traditional way. Well, you can do that. You don't have to, it's not like you leave the traditional system behind and now you're in self-determination. You can't come back. That's not the way it works. So if you're not happy with self-determination, you can always go back. Next slide. So there are 5 principles of self-determination: freedom to decide how you want to live your life, authority over your budget so that you can purchase services and supports that you want, support organized resources and staff to help you live the way you want. You're going to have a lot more to say about all of this. Responsibility to use the regional center money wisely, and confirmation that your role under this program in making decision and overseeing the service that you need is important. Next slide. So how do you enroll in self-determination? Well, you've got to be a regional center consumer. And you can't be living in a licensed facility. But let's say that I am living in a licensed facility. Can I get on the self-determination program? Well, I can request the regional center make plans to move me from the facility into the community. And then, yes, I can enroll in the self-determination program. To get on the program, you have to attend an orientation training. Like I mentioned earlier, this is not the orientation training. We're just giving this to you all as a training, a basic training on the subject. And where do you get this orientation training? You can get it through the regional centers, also the State Council on Developmental Disabilities as the orientation training, and we've given you the link to their website so you can go there and learn more about that. Or you can contact your regional centers. Next slide. Okay, so at the orientation training, you're going to learn about person-centered planning, about individual budgets. How do you come up with your individual budget? The spending plan, what is it? How do you arrange for services? What is a financial management services provider? You'll also learn about independent facilitators. So it's a very in-depth training about the self-determination program. Remember, through the regional center or State Council on Developmental Disabilities. Next slide. So let's talk about the first one, which is person-centered planning.
Thanks, Maria. So the person-centered plan is a major component of the self-determination program. And what it is it's basically a breakdown that goes into detail about your future and reaching your goals. You being the participant, the client of the regional center, lead the person-centered planning process, but with your chosen circle of support. So the intention is it should be based on what the participant, the client of the regional center wants, and with support and with guidance from their chosen network. The PCP should reflect what is important to you. The PCP can include other people like family or friends, and you, being the client of the regional center, can choose to include them in that process. Once you have your choices about what you want and need, then an IPP, individual program plan, is written based on your decisions. The IPP lays out your goals and what is needed to reach those goals, including the services and supports. So I just wanted to make it clear that the person-centered plan is a separate process, but also very much a major influence on the individual program plan, IPP. Like PCP is going to be a major factor in the development of the following IPP. The PCP, though, looks larger into like your major hopes and dreams, looking more like not just the limitations, but what are your strengths? What are your areas where you want and hope to succeed down the line? And then the specific services and supports are identified in the IPP that meet those larger goals. So just wanted to set that up, make that clear. And then just going further about PCP. Yeah. So what generally should I expect from the person-centered plan? It is a written plan that is consistent with your needs and goals. The PCP includes your preferences, and that ranges from things like recreation, transportation, friendships, what kind of therapies that you need or rely on, what you do at home, what you want to do outside of the home, jobs, family relationships. It really looks into all aspects of one's life and how to get the most out of what you want out of your own life. The plan should have clearly stated outcomes that include your strengths, your hopes, and the supports needed to have a meaningful life in the community. As Maria mentioned in the previous slides, there is this emphasis on how to use this to increase your own independence, to access the community. And that's why these are services that really become available, that are only really available if you're not in some kind of facility or institution, or you're planning to transition out of it. And that's reflected in the PCP. The goals must not be restricted because of a lack of easily identified services or supports. So just because in the short term, if a regional center, let's say, can't immediately identify a service provider that would enable you to meet a goal that you really want included in your PCP, that's not a reason not to have it in there. It shouldn't be a reason to exclude it. And if anything, the regional center should use that as an opportunity to help you, or at least help you and your IF find those resources. And speaking of the IF, IF is short for independent facilitator. And I just want to make clear the benefit of having an independent facilitator that supports and advocates for you on this person-centered plan. And in fact, there's actually been some recent updated guidance from the state agency that funds the regional centers, DDS. They're called directives. They're actually to the regional centers, but they're publicly available. And they go into detail on how it actually what would the setup be like, where a independent facilitator of your choice would be compensated just to complete the person-centered plan, to get that like out to get that started. So there was up until recently, the way it worked was you could request up to $2,500 to help to pay for an IF to set up the PCP, to go for you to have that meeting, go over the goals and everything. I say up to because it actually I just want to make clear that it may be worth considering, like, okay, how can I have some money left over to still have the IF be involved and help me complete this process of going through the SDP and then eventually getting to a budget and a spending plan, which we're going to discuss later. So you don't have to use the max amount. Think about like, okay, would an IF accept under 2,500, but we can get 2,500 and then use the remaining money to get additional assistance involvement from that IF as they go through the PCP. But there was a recent change. Now the regional center is offering a option where they pay, instead of the first one, they would pay up to $1,000 for the initial PCP and then authorize up to 40 hours of self-directed supports. The 40 hours would still be something the regional center would pay for, and I believe pay the IF. But that's something that that arrangement I recommend you talk about it with the IF. IF agencies now are actively like reorganizing their practices in taking into account this recent change. I actually was in a meeting with one IF, which I think which are fantastic, by the way, guideline group, where they were going over like the recent changes and how they were adjusting to this funding arrangement that now this other option opened up. So if you're wondering what the heck that is down there, that's what it is. This change about like how to pay off the IF just to get you started in the person-centered planning stage. And oh yeah.
And speaking of the IF, we're going to talk a little bit further about the independent facilitator. Thank you, Emily. So you don't have to have an independent facilitator, but I agree with Emily that they could be very, very helpful, not only in helping you put together your person-centered planning, but other things too. So for example, helping you make informed decisions about your budget, locate, access, coordinate services that are consistent with your IPP, identify short, mid, and long-term needs and ways to meet those needs, advocate on your behalf, of course, in the person-centered planning process and the development of the IPP, obtain services and supports for you. Next slide. You can have more than one independent facilitator, but you need to know they're going to be paid from the spending plan. Okay, what you pay the independent facilitator is negotiated between you and the independent facilitator. And again, it's going to be that money is going, aside from the money for the PCP, right? The person-centered planning, whatever work your IF does for you, that work, the money for that work will come out of your individual budget. And the budget will not be increased to include the cost of the independent facilitator. Now, parents can be independent facilitators, but not parents of minor children. And you can even choose to have the regional center be your independent facilitator. Next slide. Now, independent facilitators are not required to have a certification or a license to do their work, but they are required to get the training and principles of self-determination, the person-centered planning process, their responsibilities, in coordinating services for your IPP. Now, someone who provides a service to you under your IPP cannot be an independent facilitator, okay? And the State Council on Developmental Disabilities provides trainings for people who want to become independent facilitators. So if you're interested, you should reach out to them to get more information. If we have time at the end of the presentation, we're going to take you to DDS's website to show you where all of the information is with regard to the self-determination program. Next slide. Okay, let's talk a little bit about service providers. Next slide. So the great thing about being in the self-determination program is that you don't have to, your service provider doesn't have to be contracted with the regional center. Under the traditional method, it's mostly the case that you have to have someone who has been contracted or vendored with the regional center to provide services. So that's a great thing because it opens up the world of service providers to you, right? So they no longer have to be contracted with the regional center. And you can choose family members to provide certain services too. Next slide. Okay, so you might need to undergo a criminal background check if the service provider is one who's going to provide direct personal care services to the consumers. So example, grooming, feeding, bathing, etc. If the financial management services agency, and Emily's going to talk about the FMS, we call it FMS. If it requests a background check from any of the service providers, then you have to do it too at your cost or the cost of the employing agency. Now, the applicant or the service provider, if the service provider has a violation or a conviction on their record, they have to request an exemption from DDS, Department of Developmental Services, and obtain a clearance. So next slide, we're going to hand it over to Emily, who's going to talk about financial management services.
Thank you. So I'm going to go over into FMS and why it is its important role in SDP. So interestingly, this type of service provider, and that's what the FMS is at heart, a service provider, is the only one that is not included in that and what Maria mentioned in the previous slides about not having to go through vendored or contracted service providers that already have some relationship with the regional center. The exception is FMS, and FMS is vendored and has to be vendored and contracted with the regional center. Now, that being said, what is an FMS? Why is it important? What role does it play in SDP? And what do I do about it? So FMS has helped manage your individual budget. We're going to talk about it more later in the presentation, but think of it as the funds, the money put together to help pay for those services that you or your or the client of the regional center needs. So if you're thinking like, okay, I got this money, I got this budget amount. How am I paying people off? Am I just like taking the money and giving it to them? It's actually the FMS that handles that, this agency. So the financial management service helps to manage your budget by paying off the bills, paying your employees that you choose to provide the services. They provide the service, they pay the service providers directly. FMSs may require service providers to show that they are qualified to deliver services. So there are certain services where there are some certain things that the FMS wants to confirm, like if you are hiring someone to help drive you to and from one place to another, would be prepared to show that they have a driver's license. So just an example of like what an FMS may require. FMSs also require service providers to undergo background checks. And FMSs are the only service providers, as I mentioned, that must be vendored by a regional center. FMSs will only use the funds in your budget to pay for the services included in your IPP. And you are required to use the services of an FMS. It is non-negotiable. That said, you can and are the one who chooses which FMS you want to go with. So who pays the FMS? So there's been some recent and important updates and developments to this. Before, kind of similar to the IF that Maria mentioned, it was expected that however you paid off this FMS, because they're still an agency that has to be compensated, and they basically paying them to pay your other service providers. The expectation was it would come out of your individual budget, and your budget would not be augmented to there wouldn't be like a separate amount just to pay off the FMS. It would generally be whatever funds were freed up by cutting out the middle, the regional center, and would be enough to pay off the FMS. But that was challenging, and especially since the FMS is required. So this was the previous advice information that was in our PowerPoint before we added the update at the very bottom. So generally you had to work with the FMS, determine, issues like overtime pay is required, your individual budget can't be augmented. DDS has a list of vendored FMSs that you can choose from. And then effective July 1st, 2022, based on a directive that DDS released, the cost of the FMS is now paid by the regional center outside of your budget. So there's more information on that directive. I put the link to the directives, and fortunately, they actually have a page just on directives with SDP, because otherwise you'd have to try to go through all their directives and find specific info about SDP when you're just trying to understand SDP generally. But that's a really important change we wanted to emphasize, that now the FMS is covered by the regional center. There are actually different kinds of FMS, and to be honest, this is very, very bare bones, basic overview of what kinds there are. I don't have too much advice or detail to give. That's why we explain that this is a very, very basic overview and it's not an orientation. But there are 3 types of models of FMS. One is the bill payer, the other is the sole employer, and the third is the co-employer. And you can choose which FMS that operates under one of these models is most suitable for you. So again, just going over the bare bones of each type. One of the types is the bill payer. The goods and services are purchased directly from a business. So FMS being the one that's purchasing the goods and services. The FMS pays for the goods and services listed in your IPP. And importantly, there's no employer-employee relationship between the FMS, the service provider, or you. So that's pretty much the main distinction with the bill payer from the other types. The other is the co-employer. So this is the one where the participant, like you, actually shares some of the employer role and responsibilities with the FMS. So in the last one, in contrast to the last one, FMS maintains the primary employer liability and that other role, but there is a little bit more involvement with you as the participant in setting that up. But that being said, FMS is the employer of record. You nonetheless maintain the freedom to hire and fire employees, but you still need input. You still need to keep up to date with the FMS because they also may have certain qualifications or requirements before they pay off your service providers. The FMS nonetheless maintains primary employer liability and required insurances, and the FMS also verifies provider qualifications and processes payroll. The third and last type is the sole employer. And this one is a little bit less common, but it also gives you the most freedom. And that's because you are in fact the employee or employer of record of the service providers, not the FMS as it is in the last 2 types. So the FMS is still involved. They have to be, but but you play that employer role, and the FMS assists you by ensuring that you follow all applicable employment laws, verifies provider qualifications, and helps to process payroll. But you are required to obtain necessary employment insurances like workers' comp. So just giving a heads up that this gives you a lot more influence and say, but it also means that you have to take into account these other factors as you're choosing, as if you're taking on the role of employer of record of these service providers.
Thank you, Emily. So, and just looking at the 3 types of FMSs, like the last one, if I were a consumer, would be a little scary for me, right? Because I'm like responsible for a lot, but thank goodness that there are 3 possibilities, because, it needs to feel comfortable for you. So let's go on to the next slide, your individual budget. The amount of money that you have available to buy the services and supports that you're going to need. And it's determined by your IPP team, and that includes the consumer, of course. And so how is the budget based? Like, where's the number coming from? Well, it's gonna come from the services and supports that the regional center spent on you in the last 12 months. It's different than the amount authorized. So they may have authorized, let's say, I'm just going to say it for sake of hypo. let's say that they authorized $100,000 in services for you for the year, for the last 12 months, but you actually only spent $50,000. So the budget's going to be based on what was actually spent, which would have been the $50,000. Next slide. And the individual budget will be redetermined every year. Could go up, could go down, depending on your changing needs. Things may happen while you're in the year. There may be unaddressed needs or new needs. And so it's a conversation that you're going to have with the regional center. If you have a budget, for example, of so much amount, but then something comes up and you're going to need more services and supports, it's something that you actually need to address with the regional center, and there can be adjustments made. Now, if you don't agree with what the regional center says your budget should be, then for example, you may want it to have it increase because you need other services and supports. Then you have the right to appeal the regional center's decision not to increase your budget. The regional center has to provide you with a notice of action. It's a piece of paper that tells you what the decision was, why they decided that. The statutes, regs, or whatever else they relied on for that decision. And very important, it tells you your appeal rights. And you have the right to go to a fair hearing on your budget. Next slide. So I'm handing it over to Emily, who's going to talk about the spending plan.
Thank you. And I actually just wanted to add one more thing about the individual budget, because we've had it before where people are like, well, what if it's usually a parent has a child, has turned 3, wants to go immediately in the self-termination program. Well, if they just became eligible for regional center services, or if you've just become eligible and you want to go straight into SDP, well, how are you going to get the 12 months of the previous year's total of the funds spent? There was no budget. There was no previous 12 months. You just became eligible. Now you're trying to go into SDP. So instead, the regional center calculates the costs of the services and supports to be purchased by the regional center by using the average cost paid by that regional center for each service or support, unless they determine that you have a unique need that requires a higher or lower cost. And there still is the opportunities for you to argue these are additional needs that I have, or this is how my circumstances are unique or meet my specific needs. So just want to highlight that because it was a question that had come up and I was like, well, that's a good question. And I looked it up and that was what I found. So going into the spending plan. So the budget is the amount of, think of it as like the money. The spending plan is how the funds are distributed. It breaks it down, who's getting paid and how much. So going into more detail, what's the difference between a spending plan and the budget? The individual budget is the amount of money, and a spending plan is how you will use the money to pay for those services and supports. You can only buy services and supports that are approved by the federal government. I'm adding to that because that is a major facet of SDP and its appeal, that there is a certain amount of funding that's contributed by the federal government. But there's also restrictions that federal government may place on services that also applies to SDP. There actually is a directive that goes into that, but I want to throw that in there. The regional center is the one that approves your spending plan. You cannot purchase the same or similar service that's available from generic agencies, also known as generic resources. So that restriction in the traditional system, it also applies to SDP. If there's a generic resource that can pay for a service you need instead of the regional center, you have to go through that before the regional center even considers adding that as funding in your budget. So Okay, so if you're thinking like, okay, what if though I want to adjust the funding a little bit in my spending plan? Like I want to move a little bit of money from this to another category. It wouldn't be increasing the amount because that would be something you'd have to go through and discuss with the regional center. But can I at least take money from one and put it and just kind of reduce it there and then move it to another? Yes, you can. All services under SDP falls under three categories. The category of living arrangement, the category of employment and community participation, and the category of health and safety. And you can actually move up to 10% from one category to another. So if you want to take some funding from a service that's under that's categorized as a living arrangement and move it toward a service you want under health and safety or increase it, you can do that up to 10%. And you can actually do more, but you do need to discuss it and get agreement from the regional center. So it is possible to do more than 10%. It's just that you can't like unilaterally do it. You have to get the regional center involved, let them know, see if they're okay with it. And if you're wondering, okay, with this whole SDP, you don't have to, you no longer have the service coordinator actively, or at least not, or generally it's possible. Well, the service coordinator doesn't really play a role anymore in, going through a list of their vendored or contracted agencies, but they could. And so I'm just bringing up where the service coordinator actually still plays a role in all of this. So they can still help with services and supports provided through the regional center system. So they could give you the option of like, well, we have these vendored agencies. If you're, thinking about like a respite agency and you just want to go with one that has already and rather than finding one on your own, you're more comfortable with who we have vendored with. Here's a list, but you're the one who sets that up and the FMS pays them off. So the service coordinator is still there to be a resource of potential providers, service providers, agencies. The service coordinator is also actively involved in that process for determining the individual budget. So yeah, it is a negotiation, that whole process about how much money do I need in my budget? And that service coordinator is part of that group. And their service coordinator actually can be an independent facilitator if you choose to. So if there's a circumstance or a situation where like, I need an IF service coordinator, can you fill in that role for now? You can bring them in. That being said, generally the benefit of SDP is that you're not having to rely on as much on a service coordinator, who a lot of the times are having a big caseload, have to help a lot of different clients, but just letting you know that is an option that you have. And we included slides about the following, which is the SDP ombudsperson, because that's a potential resource where, in addition to the appeals process that Maria mentioned, is another way that you can raise concerns or complaints relating to an aspect of your service plan, the FMS. So basically, if it's something where it's not just it's one thing if there's a dispute about the budget or dispute about like what services or supports do I actually need. If it's something where it's like my FMS is not paying my providers on time. Like I had this FMS, I got them involved. They're supposed to pay off my respite worker, and the respite worker is saying, "Where's my money?" I don't see funding from them. This is the SDP ombudsperson is really helpful. I've actually had cases before where we reached out to them and like, we're having this problem here, and the SDP helps to speed things up, initiate that action on the FMS's part. And if there's other issues going on that are just like affecting access to your funding or budget or you being able to go through SDP. So I included information about the SDP ombudsperson. There's their email, their phone, and their webpage. And there's also the following DRC resources. Our webpage. We have just about like general regional center but not just regional center services, but what your rights are under the laws that created the regional centers, the Lanterman Act. We refer you to our manual, rights under the Lanterman Act. We've got Spanish versions. We also have our helpline if you need translation assistance. And and not just that, we've got a lot of publications. I mean, we've got attorneys and advocates that deal with a whole range of issues. So I include a link to other helpful resources. And just going over more resources outside of DRC that really go into self-determination program. One is Office of Clients' Rights. Well, okay, they are part of DRC, but they are like a sister side to the Legal Advocacy Unit, but they also should know about, and they provide advocacy support and services for clients of regional centers. But outside of DRC, there's Disability Voices United, DVU. And in fact, every week they have a training or a webinar that goes into a specific topic or aspect of SDP. So I've seen one where, examples are ones where IF agencies gave their feedback and input, one that goes over the different kinds of FMS models. What's the bill employer versus the sole employer? Ones that actually go over recent developments from on SDP from DDS. And on top of that, their webinars are recorded. So I put the link there, and so you can find all their previous webinars that go into these different topics that really go into like the details of various aspects of SDP. I also added the State Council on Developmental Disabilities, SCDD. And in fact, SCDD provides orientations. It's not just the regional center, and they have a whole webpage where you can where they schedule and show like when they have these orientations. And there is DDS, the state agency that oversees the regional centers, the Department of Developmental Services, and they actually have a whole separate webpage just on SDP, including the directives they've released. They also have a whole FAQ page that's actually really informative, and they break it down in a really convenient way. And they also, and of course, your regional center would have information on SDP as well. So they should have that information ready to share with you if you want to know more about SDP. And there we go. We've reached the end of the presentation. So yeah, ending off with our intake line and our hours, because if you do have an issue not relating to the regional center, including SDP, this is how we get feedback and also make decisions about whether or not we're able to provide legal support or even straight up representation. It's through our intake line. So if you do have that issue and you want to see if what we can do, or if we can even provide legal services free of charge, contact the intake line and explain the situation, and then they refer that to the appropriate practice group in our organization.
Thank you, Emily. Lots of good information. Hopefully we've cleared things up a little bit for you. I know it's not an easy thing to wrap your head around, your PCPs, your IFs, your FMSs, oh my goodness, your IPP. But anyway, it gets easier the more you get into it. And